Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of RetFix and Chill. We're back with a little bit of a change of pace today. We have Chiraj Jhaveri, who's going to talk to us about starting a clinical trial. I mean, a lot of us want to know how to get started, what exactly is needed, and we're going to be learning a lot from him today. Chiraj, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to talk about this today.
Yeah, so Chirag, I think you had a couple overview slides that I think we would like to get started with, just to kind of share your knowledge about clinical research in the private practice setting.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we go. So, in general, clinical trials, as we know, are the bread and butter of how we develop new therapies in all of medicine. And in ophthalmology, particularly retina, it's really unique in that a lot of times, many of the participants in these clinical trials are from private practice settings. So they're not always from academic places. And so I was very fortunate to be part of a practice that has a clinical trials arm where we do a lot of research. And I think it's been something that's been really a great part of my career. So I just really want to quickly kind of discuss some of the players in clinical trials, just so we have a little bit of a layout of the landscape. But in general, of course, we have a sponsor, which is often related to, in the setting of a pharmaceutical. A clinical trial would be often the pharmaceutical company, but sponsors can be, of course, the federal government, like NIH. You can have possibly other, private sponsors as well. But in essence, that's the person or entity who has the finances to help run the clinical trials, and they maybe have some sort of reason to, either they have an IP or they have some sort of control over potential therapy. The FDA, of course, is the regulatory body that oversees clinical trials as well as approves treatments in the United States of America. A clinical research organization, or a CRO, is often the intermediary that works between the sponsor and the research site. The IRB is the regulatory body that makes sure that the clinical trial is being run under ethical standards. And of course, you have the research site. And then you, of course, also have patients who are the study patients in these clinical trials. So, really quickly, in terms of why would you want to be part of a clinical trial, you know, for me, I think it's something that has been a wonderful experience in my career. It's something that allows me to participate in actively in new and upcoming therapies in my specialty. And that adds a lot of variety to my schedule, right? After doing, the 10,000th injection, kind of thinking about new therapies, new mechanisms of action, how this might change our field is really refreshing at times. It also can diversify your skills for future changes. If you're the first one doing maybe a new surgical procedure that delivers subretinal therapy, gene therapy, for example, you're going to be well versed with it when and if it becomes, approved. And then, of course, this is something that you can offer for your patients. Sometimes we have a lot of conditions that don't necessarily have the most ideal therapies or have no therapies, as well as, of course, we're always trying to find better therapies that can either reduce treatment burden for patients or increase, their efficacy. And then lastly, you know, it does diversify a practice's income revenue. And it is clinical trials are a separate entity. They're contracts that are negotiated directly. They have, very little or nothing to do with insurance rates or anything like that. So, of course, as things become increasingly harder and harder to sometimes run a private practice with decreasing reimbursements and just increased costs of running a private practice, this adds a little bit of an extra income revenue that in many ways can be protected from some of the stresses that a regular practice has. I'll let you guys ask any questions at this point if you have.
Yeah, I guess if you were, say, you're a second year fellow just about to look for jobs and practices say, we do research. Can you describe maybe what are the different flavors that can be and what to look out for when you're meeting a practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically speaking, if somebody's saying that they're doing research, they're most likely, and if it's at a non-academic lab, it's typically going to be you're participating in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 clinical trials. And so, these are, the ones that we study about, the ones that we're often tested on, Marina, Anchor, View 1, View 2, all of these are clinical trials that sites participated in and enrolled patients in. There are other aspects outside of private practice that can, be involved with research as well. Obviously, if you're at an academic center, you can also be part of clinical trials, but oftentimes you may be doing, preclinical research or maybe specifically imaging research, for example, things like that. Um, a lot of times people think that when you're on, advisory boards, you're part of the research side. In reality, actually, it's really interesting. Advisory boards are not part of kind of the clinical trials development or therapeutic development platform. Those are actually entities that are usually post approval. So they're probably part of the commercial or marketing side, actually. And you may be asked to give your opinion about things of a current product. But typically we do, separate them out because you don't have to have a research center or anything like that to be a part of an advisory board. So mostly it's going to be, hey, we have a research center where we enroll patients.
What if you wanted to have like more input? What are the avenues or routes to do that?
In terms of like starting a clinical trial
Yeah,
center,
or like working with like, actually how do they design their inclusion, exclusion? Like what if you wanted to really
great
be a part
question.
of like designing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a lot of that actually has to do several factors. There's, of course, individuals who may just be publishing a lot, right? So you have academic center and you're just publishing a lot for a lot of things, retrospective analysis, comparative meta-analysis, all of these things. And maybe you have also a lab. So a lot of times an individual like that may get asked, but a lot of the protocol development committees also have private practice physicians who have clinical trial centers. And those types of invitations are usually, because you run a pretty successful clinical trials and because you enroll pretty well. So actually the first step would be to have a research center on which then you were, enrolling and doing well. And that participation then often will invite you into maybe a writing committee. So you may be part of the writing committee that's publishing the manuscript for the results. And then that can also potentially lead to, being invited to a steering committee or a protocol development committee, things like that. So a lot of that gets added on after or because of the work that you've kind of already.
Cool. So you're describing here sort of the optimal clinical research center?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. You don't need a whole lot to get started, but you just, have to have that desire. So one thing I will say is that if you're interested in research and clinical trials, you have to have that desire. You have to have that interest. You also have to have that personality where you're saying, hey, we're going to be doing an investigational study. We don't know how well this works necessarily. We have to compare. It is a different personality. It's almost like the difference between like, new tech when you have an early adopter or a late adopter, right? A late adopter's very reasonable. They're individuals who say, hey, I want to make sure that this is completely vetted out and I want it just to be ready to go. And then I'll think about using it, right? An early adopter is like, hey, I see the potential in all of this. I see the benefit that this can give. And I want to be part of that first wave of experiencing that benefit and maybe even be part of the ones that helps kind of fine tune it and guide where it goes. So that's the type of personality I think you have to have, and you have to have a little bit of comfort of outside of what we already know, or outside of 95% success rate, or whatever that we sometimes feel, or safety. But without that type of personality, research can't be done, isn't done, right? Everybody who did something to look at something new, they were a little bit, trying to push the envelope. So you have to be comfortable with that. You have to be comfortable with assessing, potential adverse effects and things like that. But once you have that drive, you need a 4-meter vision lane often. So that's a slightly longer room than maybe some of our other rooms are. You may want some additional imaging equipment, but when you start off, if you're doing 1 or 2 studies, you don't need a whole lot. The OCT machine that you have and the fundus photography and SA you have are usually going to be adequate. When you run a very busy research center, you may want to almost have another machine just because of just flow. You absolutely have to have a research coordinator. In the very beginning, you don't have to have a site director, but you really want to, your research coordinators are the lifeline of your research center. You want to find individuals who are interested in research and somebody who is maybe detail oriented, somebody who, goes over, things and reviews them to make sure, knows how to follow a protocol. So somebody who's very methodical and whatnot is really, really important as a research coordinator, because they're going to often be, you know, working and interacting with the study patients even more than you may at times, because, their visit may be 2 hours long and they're doing blood draws and imaging and vision testing and review of, ConMeds and all these other things that your research coordinator is going to be going through with. And then you are going to need some places for, storing some of the kits and some of the investigational products, and also some of the binders for source material and things like that. So it's very, very doable. These pictures are at our research center where we have a dedicated space. But prior to that, it was integrated into our private practice, and we basically kind of used any space we have, any situation at that time.
Do you have any tips on getting started with a research coordinator? I feel like that's one of the kind of biggest obstacles in my mind. If you're in private, especially, maybe you're not super busy and you're trying to add clinical trials in, and my experience has been the same. The research coordinator in my last practice was absolutely essential, or we've never been able to complete anything. But she was kind of a full-time job also, even with a handful of studies that we had going for drug trials. It's a relatively large investment for someone, maybe solo practice or smaller group, to add a research coordinator. Any kind of suggestions on how to kind of get that next step to get someone full-time to actually get you going with these trials?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really what makes or breaks kind of, the physician's day and the research center. There's a lot of ways to approach this. Some of this, of course, is depending on how much time you already have or don't have. If you're somebody who has a slightly slower clinic, you're starting off, like a lot of times new fellows will have, you can kind of learn in parallel. And obviously that's a great way, because if you are learning some of these things, you also know how to oversee it, and you also know how to maybe help train people in the future. Having said that, really, you just want to find somebody that's motivated. We've had several different routes. We've had individuals who are maybe interested in medicine, and for whatever reason, their life, trajectory changed for, extenuating circumstances or whatnot. And maybe they couldn't go to medical school, but they had that desire and that aptitude. We've had very motivated individuals like that we've hired on as research coordinators, and then often eventually even become site directors for us. Also, sometimes we look internally. So if we have a really excellent staff on the clinic side, so, a really great scribe or tech or whatnot, and we see that potential in them, we'll engage them and say, how are you interested in, being a research coordinator? That first research coordinator is going to have to do, of course, a lot of work learning if they have never done that before. So there are resources. SOCRA, or Society of Clinical Research Associates, is a great option. It's a website. You can do online stuff. They even have, I think, in-person meetings if you want to send an individual to. And that really will get you up to like the vernacular, the vocabulary, the protocols, just the nuts and bolts of what a research coordinator would have to do. But, some of it also can be kind of trial by fire, as you learn and start. A lot of the research community is relatively small, and we understand that, there's a lot of people who they ask questions, and a lot of the monitors we interact with, a lot of other people are very helpful. One of the great resources, if you want to try to start, is actually be part of the DRCR Retina Network. This is an NIH-funded retina network that, obviously we know the DRCR Retina Network in terms of all the work that they've done. And they're very collegial. They're very open. They're not pharmaceutical sponsored in that way. So, they're really a great resource. And so often, if I may have a new research coordinator, and they'll talk to, our monitors from the DRCR. It's like, hey, what exactly am I supposed to do for this if they've never done it? And they'll be very, very, very helpful. But even, other clinical trials, the monitors can be very helpful. But really find that motivated person. And then really to help do that, pay them adequately. It is a different system than a clinic. So if you're trying to apply the way maybe a lean clinic is run, it may not perfectly work in the research side. You do have to kind of, this is a very specialized, very, specific skill set that I think is even smaller in some ways than like, an ophthalmic tech or something like that. And so, just if you find a good research coordinator, you want to make sure that you adequately pay them and then also promote them or incentivize them in some way to have, to enroll well, to do well. And so, that's a great way. And the finances work differently because like I said, the contracts are very different and then the margins can be a lot lower. It actually the margins can be a lot higher. The overhead can be a lot less for a research center than it is for a clinical practice.
Do you know, like on average, how many patients you would have to recruit per year to sort of break even on the clinical trials? I mean, that's a broad question, but.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Honestly, it depends on which trials you're in. NIH-funded trials contracts are a little lower, but they still can allow you to have, have decent revenue. And then, of course, pharmaceutical companies, you can negotiate, a lot, possibly. Another way I would actually kind of look at this is that oftentimes, if you saw, 4 to 6 research patients in a day, let's say, that could easily equate to, 30 to 35 clinic patients in a day, right? So in some ways, honestly, you would only need to see if you saw one research patient a day, you would break even. Actually, you wouldn't even break even. You would probably make a profit even with that.
Interesting. Yeah, you mentioned before how you have to be a little bit brave, right? And I think that's because, the way I think of clinical research is just sort of increasing the spread, right, of the risk benefit ratio a little bit. So
Yeah.
how do you explain that to patients? Like, what do you tell them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, the discussion I have, prior to probably complement inhibitors, the discussion I have with a potential research candidate was always my longest discussions for the day. And even now, even with complement inhibitors, they're almost getting as long as my research discussions. But sometimes you have patients who are treatment naive patients that or the study only requires treatment naive patients. So therefore, that means that oftentimes you might be talking to a patient that you just met that day, right? They're a new patient to you because they're being referred to for new onset diabetic macular edema or wet AMD. And so it is definitely a much longer discussion that you have to have. You have to kind of talk to them. And the way I approach it is, I say, look, I always talk to them about the standard of care first. I said, here's what we normally do, and this is what we can do in our clinic. And then I say, but we also have a clinical, trials center, and I do a lot of clinical research. And I like doing clinical research because it's given, us access to newer therapies. And some of those therapies have actually now become the standard of care. And so it's very nice. Now, obviously, the disease process that you're talking about may also change, the conversation a little bit. Prior to complement inhibitors, when we were talking about geographic atrophy, we would say there is no treatment. So if we would like to try to see if there's something available, the only way really we would be able to do that is through clinical trials. But with DME and AMD patients, we often say, here's what we have available. The injections are initially often monthly, and some patients can extend them out. And we are looking at better ways to either treat this or ways that can maybe last longer. So, an idea like a gene therapy, where you may only need one injection or you may need significantly less injections, is I say, right now, these injections you need to keep getting possibly, but this treatment is a means that ideally or hopefully we can only have to do once, and you may have much better control, and you may not need any injections, or you may need a whole lot less injections. So there's that benefit for that patient. So really, when you pick a clinical trial, you have to think, and this is what we do when we actually discuss, hey, which trials do we want to try to be a part of? We say, what is the benefit to the patient? Is it reduction of treatment burden? Is it ease of delivering the therapy, an injection versus an oral therapy, or possibly even a drop? Even though we've been looking for the holy grail of drops for retinal conditions, and it's hard to find. But that's that benefit. So you have to identify that, and that's what I talk about. And then I always say you do not have to be part of the clinical trial, but if you're interested, I think this is a potentially good option for you. So you really always want to make sure that you're following the ethical guidelines. And then patients get a consent form, and the consent form can be very, very scary because it talks about everything. I always also tell them, if you have any questions about the consent form, because some of it's scary, talk to us. Let's talk about it, and let's figure out what is a concern or not a concern.
Interesting. So it sounds like you have to kind of believe in the trial, right? To a degree.
Absolutely, yeah. And we see that sometimes too. Like, we don't know what the final outcomes are, and so we always tell patients, I don't know how well this is going to do or not. But mass trials, we have no idea how well patients are doing. But sometimes there are certain conditions where if you have a really significant adverse event, just like in private practice, you may, we're all humans, and we may be a little bit, oh, wow, I don't know is this a good thing or not a good thing for our patients. And we may maybe enroll a little less, possibly because of that concern. How well the CRO interacts with us, how well the sponsor interacts with us also. I mean, you have to believe in the trial, but you also have to have a good working condition for the trial, right? Is it easy to enroll? How do we upload the data and the queries and the photos? All of that is something that's facilitating, right? And we try, sometimes we have trials that have a lot of photos, and we know that that's a burden on patients, and we try to ease them. We try to say, hey, we got snacks for you, or here's a break, and here's this and that. But if it's very, very burdensome, that also may dissuade, a research center from enrolling really, really well. But, in some cases, it's absolutely necessary, particularly if it's in your trial. But you have to believe, but I think part of it is, I'm not trying to say you have to have this blind faith, right? I mean, this is the scientific. I think it's more like you have to be optimistic about the potential mechanisms of actions and how they may be beneficial. And if if somebody is trying to say, hey, we have, we have some, a therapy where if you dance 3 times in a circle and we think that your AMD is going to get better, and if you can't connect that scientific rationale and you have a hard time, justifying it, you're not going to do well. You're not going to enroll well. And rightly so. Maybe that isn't something that you really need to, be following. And so whenever we look at a trial, usually there's a presentation that's given to you, you have information that's given to you, and we read the mechanism of action and try to, understand it better and make sure that it's something that, falls in line. A lot of times it's a little bit easier. It's like, hey, we have a anti-VEGF therapy that is, meant to last longer because we've proved these, chemical bonds, and here's some of the preclinical animal studies, et cetera, et cetera. So you do need to learn about actually the treatments that you're doing.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility. We're the gatekeepers to the patients, and as a community, you should make sure that, we're doing a good job for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You had look like another slide just on how to get involved.
Yeah. So,
trials, yeah.
Once you've identified a research coordinator and you feel like you have some of the, the necessary infrastructure, mainly being a 4 meter lane, a lot of the other stuff that can come, you want to engage with potential sponsors. So DRCO Retina Network is great. If you do pediatric retina, PDIG is also a network. And then, of course, industry. And the way you can get involved in industry is first you can engage your medical science liaison. So every company will have a medical science liaison. Technically speaking, I think you're supposed to engage them first, as opposed to like the commercial side. They can come in, say, hey, can I come by? But you ask the medical science liaison, I was like, hey, I would like to know what you guys are doing on your research side. And then they can come and give you a presentation, and you can tell them, I'm interested in being part of a clinical trial. Can you let me know? And things like that. And then, at academic meetings, you try to meet with them. It's like, hey, I would like to meet with your research side for, this company, this company, or this company. And you just introduce yourself and you get known. Once again, the research community is, relatively small. So, they'll say, hey, we have oftentimes the first site will be part of like a phase 3, right? Phase 3s are very, very large. They include a lot more sites than they maybe necessarily need because they really want to ensure that they can get enrolled, well and fast and timely. And so, they'll have maybe, 120 sites, and actually at the end of the study, maybe only 80 of them even enrolled a patient. But having said that, because they're willing to include so many more sites, that's your way that you can maybe be part of it. And then if you enroll well, you're again, then you have, hey, Dr. So-and-so did really well in this study. Let's include them in that. And then the CRO, which is once again, the intermediary, they're the people who, have monitors and they do the day to day, do you have this form or have you done this? It's like that a lot of times. They'll also know, hey, they did really well on this site. If we recommend them for this next study that we're going to be a CRO, we'll look good also. So that kind of just then it gets the ball rolling. You want to have some standard operating procedures in place. And then, you have a pre-selection site visit, if you've been deemed as somebody who possibly could be a site. You'll also work with IRB approval. You also at the same time review a contract. And then as all of that gets done, then you'll have what we call a site initiation visit. Well, they'll say, okay, everything seems to be good. They'll send somebody over or maybe they'll do it virtually. And then we'll say you are activated. And now we're sending you the investigational product and you're ready to enroll. And we have this, the electronic software or your paper, source, for charting and documenting each research visit. All that's been ready and done, and you're ready to go. But the first step is just engage. Say, hey, I'm interested. And I think that's, we'll get the.
Can you comment on kind of the rise of private practice and clinical trials over the last 15 years and kind of where you see things going? I just noticed that it's just so much more nimble in private practice in some ways than UIC or as a state institution. There's so much red tape. Even getting the first patient enrolled took too long for it to be practical.
Yeah, that's a really interesting history for, I think, retina specifically. I'm sure it occurs in other specialties as well. But, as we have the retina specialists are some of the smallest number of specialists in medicine. And what's happened also is that, however, we do see a high volume of patients. And that in combination, I think, is what's allowed clinical trials to exist in the private space. If you are looking at a, hypertensive product, you have so many hypertensive patients that that several academic centers alone can probably enroll the number of patients that are needed. And yes, academic centers are a little bit clunkier in terms of getting things approval because there's a lot more committees and whatnot. We may be able to get a study started in 2 to 3 months, while the academic center may take 9 to 12 months to get all the regulatory and paperwork and approvals done. So for retina, it's been like this for 15, even more than that, probably 20 plus years. I think even since basically the advent of anti-VEGF, with Million Anchor, et cetera, where there's this ability, because we see such a significant number of patients and we can get things started faster. And, frankly speaking, the retina specialist team takes a long time to get through. And I think that the individuals that often are going into that specialty are already maybe academically, a little oriented or academically inclined anyways, but they just happen to be in a private practice. It's all facilitated this ability to have research trials or have private practices participate in research trials.
How do you see, the slow and steady rise of private equity and private practice retina influencing this? Does it make the conversation easier? Does it facilitate? Does it hinder?
Yeah, I think at the granular level, meaning at the patient-to-patient interaction, I don't see it changing dramatically. And the reason why is because irregardless of the runnings of a practice, the trial is dictated by, the protocol. And that protocol goes through a very long process by the sponsor. And then that all protocol is also reviewed by the FDA. And there's the protocol, the sponsor has a two-way dialogue when they're developing this protocol with the FDA. And the FDA may say, hey, no, we're not going to let you do it this way. You have to go back and do it, or you have to go back and change this because this is not, we don't think this is statistically great, or we don't think this and that. So that is all outside of that. I think really what's going to be important is making sure that the FDA continues to have individuals who have the statistical expertise and the analytical expertise for evaluating clinical trials and make sure that they're, done really well. At a slightly greater level, yes, obviously, if you have a very large conglomerate of practices, they obviously can choose to participate in trials together or not together. So, there might be a situation where you have an adoption by a very large private equity group for a study, and they say, hey, we are so big that we want to do just all of our sites want to do that study. And that may make, independent research centers a little bit harder to participate in certain studies possibly. I don't see that as much, or haven't seen that as much. Of course, I'm not privy to everybody's contracts or anything like that. But, we ourselves included, as well as a lot of other research centers, we've not seen us have the inability to be part of a lot of the ongoing trials. I can't imagine that, a large conglomerate could, boycott a study and it then be killed by that. I mean, you never know, because I think there's still enough individual private practices that are part of the research community for that. And I'm not really sure if there'd be a specific reason why, but there probably could always be a reason why. But yeah, we'll have to see. I think that the direct study patient interaction and safety currently is a lot more protected and isolated than I think the fears that people have for private practice and how private equity may affect some of the decisions that are being made there.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. That was very helpful. This has been an absolutely incredible overview of all parts of clinical research. Anything you'd like to add to help kind of close up, or kind of final thoughts?
If you're interested, you can email anybody who's in the research community. Most of the investigators are very open. I'm happy. I have friends who've messaged me, texted me, said, hey, I think I'm interested, and I'm happy to kind of give the advice that we've had and all of the pitfalls that we've already gone through and whatnot. And a lot of it is just that, just like, hey, it's a very doable thing. It's just, the ophthalmology medical language seems foreign to anybody else. But once you kind of learn it, you're like, okay, this is, manageable. Same concept. Getting research is something that getting started in research is very, very doable. And just ask. So if anybody has any questions, anybody wants to know, hey, what else do I need to do? I'm happy to be contacted and talk people through it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Chirag.
Thank you, guys. It was great. Great talking to all of you guys.